Welcome back to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Sonship Review Part 7, and this is Session 6. So I just got through showing you how Exodus 1 to 21 is the fulfillment of Genesis chapter 15, verse 13. Now, here's the second part of Exodus. Remember, each one of these has 4 parts. By the way, I'm not going to do this kind of detail on everything. I'm just showing you how this works. This is chapter 2, verse 1 to chapter 15, verse 21. And in those chapters, you have the fulfillment of Genesis 15:14. Let's go over to Genesis 15:14 and look at that. And here it is. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. I'm just going to show you one verse over there in this. This is Exodus chapter 12. But look. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they lent unto them such things they required, and they spoiled the Egyptians. Well, they did come out with great substance. Okay, now, this section right here, let me back up. Right there, that chapter 2, verse 1 to 15:21, it will not surprise you, but those 14 chapters are broken up into 3 major parts. In other words, this big part has some subparts to it. I just want to show them to you just with the thing. So here it is. Chapter 2, verse 1. Are you understanding what I'm saying here? Okay. So this first part in Exodus, it was Exodus 1:1 to 21, and then it was Exodus chapter 2, verse 1 to chapter 15, verse 4, what was it, 40? 21? Okay. And so this is divided up into subparts. So here's this first one, chapter 2, verse 1 to chapter 4 and verse 31. And there's going to be 2 more of those. That I'm just putting it on the board so you'll kind of see that in your mind. And this makes sense, doesn't it? Because if those people are going to leave out of Egypt, you've got to raise up a leader. Someone has to lead this. So Moses is raised up as a deliverer. That's an issue in this part of this second part of Exodus. Chapter 5, verse 1 to chapter 12, verse 30, those are the judgments that God rains down on the nation of Egypt. You could name all those. The water turned to blood, and the dust and lice, and the darkness over all the earth, and the murrain of cattle, and all of those different, ending with the firstborn, the Passover. And then the third part is chapter 12, verse 31 to chapter 15, verse 21, and that is Israel's actual exodus out of the land as they're leaving Egypt with two things. With great substance and a high hand. And I don't just put that on there for detail. Those are 2 separate issues that we really need to be aware of. Just like some of these other things I was saying, there were 2 major issues about Israel that God was summing up everything under 2 categories, the uncleanness category and the accursed category. And so what's happening here is when they're leaving out of Egypt, there's 2 main issues there. One day we'll have a chance to look at all of those. Now let's go to the third section. Remember, you had Exodus 1:1 to 2:1, 2:1 to 15:21. You're not through at the book of Exodus. You got 2 more parts left. So number 3 is 15:22 to 18:27. And that is God is educating Israel about His Jehovah-ness and grace. And what I mean about His Jehovah-ness is God is showing Israel that He will be for them in order for them to fulfill the Abrahamic covenant, that they will be a great nation, that they will inherit that land, that they would be all that He said to Abraham that they would be. It is not in their power to produce that themselves. They are not the mightiest nation out there. As a matter of fact, we've already read in Joshua chapter 7 how they fled before their enemies and they couldn't stand. And God says, you're going to need me to do some things for you. So you have all of those Jehovah compound words. Remember, you have Jehovah Jireh and Jehovah Ramah and Jehovah, of all those different Jehovah compound words, those were things that God said, I am going to be this for you, and I'm going to be this for you. I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to deliver you. I'm going to do all of these different things for you. We'll do the details of that sometime. But that's what this part is about. God is educating them and saying, let me be all of the things that you are going to need. And then secondly, and I need to give it to you as a free gift of grace. So it's not about you deserving it or earning it or being worthy of it. I'm just going to give it to you. So that was the third. And now the fourth in Exodus is chapter 19 verse 1 to chapter 40 verse 38. And that is where Israel contracts with God to be dealt with on the basis not of His grace, but on the basis of their works. Big mistake. That, by the way, is the first, this right here, this last one right here. Let me just look at that. 19:1 to 40:38. That is the first between here and the time they enter into the land under Joshua. That is the first of three major failures that the nation encountered. Not allowing God, because look, in this third one, I know it's, in this third one, when you see that God educates Israel about His Jehovah's and grace, they're out of the land and they're traveling toward Mount Sinai, and in between the time that they leave Egypt and get to Mount Sinai, God puts 5 trials in front of Israel to prove to them they cannot do this on their own. But they must rely on Him to do it for them and to give it to them by His grace. And He proves that to them 5 times. Yet, when they get to when they get to Mount Sinai, Israel says, we want to be dealt with on the basis of our works and not by grace. That was a major, major failure. The second one was the golden calf. That takes place out Mount Sinai. Moses is up on the mountain, and they get to thinking, well, we don't even know if that guy is still alive. So they bring all their jewelry and golden instruments, they melt it down, they make a golden calf, and when Moses looks down there, oh, people died over that one. The third major failure, they get right to the edge of the land, they send 12 spies into the land, and they come back and they go, oh, it's a land flowing with milk and honey, but there are giants in the land, and we're like grasshoppers in their sight, and we can't overtake them in this land. What did God say? I'll do it. I'll do it. But they balked at God being sufficient to do that. That was the third major failure. Look, I'm pointing this out to you to say, when you're looking at this, there are things that are happening that God is looking at in a very particular way with regard to what He wants to do with Israel. All right, let's leave that and move on now. Leviticus, because I'm going to do any more detail, I just want to take you through the rest of this. Leviticus is also divided into 4 parts, and you've got it in your notes, so let's just breeze through it. Chapter 1, verse 1 to chapter 10, verse 20, that's where you're given the laws and statutes regarding all the different offerings and the service of the priest. Then the second major part is in 11:1 to 25:55. That is where you have, and I've called it this, the details of the middle wall of partition. What is the middle wall of partition? If you remember in some of those outlines that we had, there was a deal like this, and we called this a wall of partition. Below here was Gentiles, and up here was Israel. And all of that went along until they got to what? When did that change? That changed when God stopped working with Israel, interrupted that program, brought in a dispensation of Gentile grace so that now Jew and Gentile are on equal footing. Remember, before, God's not dealing with the Gentiles. He had consigned them over to the adversary back at the Tower of Babel. Now He's dealing with Israel. Now, yes, there can be proselytes to Israel, but when you get to the dispensation of grace, Paul says, and He has broken down that middle wall of partition between us. It's not there anymore. Well, look, in Leviticus 11:1 to 25:55, that's the details of what that middle wall of partition consisted of. And I'll tell you what it is in a nutshell. It is the things that God required from Israel that made them appear to be distinct and separate and unique from all of the Gentile nations. They were not supposed to fit in and look like the Gentiles and act like the Gentiles and do the things they did. There were some things that they were supposed to be very, very different, and it was supposed to be seen. It was supposed to be obvious. Those are the things that constitute that middle wall of partition. Number 3, 26:1 to verse 46, and that is the description of the blessings and curses. You know what Leviticus 26 is? It's that the 5 courses of punishment. We've been through that. And that's a part all on its own. And then lastly, 27 verses 1 to 24, and that is the regulations regarding making vows and paying tithes and all that kind of business. And you say, well, gosh, why wouldn't that just be in with the priestly things? Why wouldn't they just put that in with that? Here, listen why. In fact, I put it on the deal. Because it is in that the issue of redemption comes up. What it takes to make redemption. The very fundamentals of redemption are laid out in that last chapter. Now, the book of Numbers. Chapter 1 verse 1 to chapter 10 verse 10. That is the numbering of the people out Mount Sinai to establish the armies and to get God's instructions for how they're going to enter the land. And when I say their instructions, they're going to go in a certain order, and when they camp, they're going to camp. Look. They're going to camp with the tribes 3 deep, arranged with each other, and it's not going to be, well, we're going to, you know what, we like this view over here, we're going to set up over here. There wasn't any of that. All of that had purpose behind it. So God said, no, here's the way you'll arrange yourselves, and it will always be this way, because this is picturing something. Okay, so there's the numbering of the armies, and then giving them instructions for entering the land. Chapter 10, verse 11 to 21:35, that is that third unfortunate, I can't help but think about that movie they did about the kids, a series of unfortunate events. Well, this is the third major unfortunate event since the Exodus. They balked at entering into the land. 22:1 to 25:18 is the third one. God warns this is great. God sends a warning to the Gentiles because here's what Satan is thinking. Remember, in the land of Canaan, he's got his nations in there. And God sends a warning to the Gentiles that nothing will thwart His plan and purpose with Israel. There's 2 things that Satan is counting on here to keep Israel from becoming what they were supposed to become. One is the opposition of the Gentiles. And God has sent a message to Gentiles that says, no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, there is absolutely nothing you can do that will keep my plan and purpose from ultimately being fulfilled. Here's the second thing they were counting on. The rebelliousness of Israel. And here's the second part of the message. And no matter how rebellious Israel wants to get, no matter how far away from me they want to go, there is nothing they will do that will keep me from ultimately fulfilling my plan and purpose with them. I am going to have a great nation. They are going to own the land. They are going to be the head of all nations. That's all going to happen. So that's very interesting sitting over there in the book of Numbers. Now you might say to yourself, well, wait a minute. The Gentiles are opposing everything, and hey, the Israelites, they bought into that, didn't they? They worshiped false gods. They even offered their kids to Molech, and they did all of that kind of stuff. And that was the whole thing over there in Romans 9. Look, you're seeing this here. You're going to get to this. When we get back over to Romans 9, you're going to see where they're going to make an accusation and say, well, it doesn't look like God's plan was very good, and it doesn't look like God's word was very effective. It sure didn't produce anything, and because they're going to say, the word of God was of none effect. And Paul's going to say, the word of God has been doing exactly what, I've already told you this, it's doing exactly what it was supposed to do. And what was that word supposed to do? Call out a remnant. And that's why he's going to say over in Romans 9, they are not all Israel who are of Israel. Just because you're a Jew, you think you're it, that's not what this is about. This word is calling out a believing remnant. That's part of understanding what's going to happen over there in Romans chapter 9. So can you see bits and pieces here of how all of this comes into play to understanding what Paul is going to talk about over there? And then the last part, the last division in Numbers is 26:1 to 36:13. And that is the details of the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. And then at the end, they're given some instructions before they enter the land. They're re-given the law. Of course, we'll see that in Deuteronomy. And then they're numbered again to go into the land with their armies. Numbered the first time at Mount Sinai, the second time just before they actually do enter the land after the 40 years in the wilderness. That's why it's called the book of Numbers. 2 particular times in which they are numbered. Okay, now Deuteronomy. 4 parts to this book. Chapter 1, verses 1 to chapter 3, verse 29. Moses rehearses that whole issue of the 40 years wandering in the wilderness, and he begs this new generation not to follow in the footsteps of those that died in the wilderness. The second part is chapter 4, verse 1 to chapter 28, verse 68, and that is the re-giving of the law contract and all the details of that. Third is 29:1 to chapter 30, verse 20, and this is important because just before they enter into the land, God makes an additional covenant with them that reconfirms that they own the land. Maybe we'll have an opportunity sometime to talk about that covenant. And by the way, you know why he gives this other covenant? It's an unconditional covenant. But look, here's why. Well, Sandy gave me a new pointer. I'm going to use my new pointer. However, it's in the shape of a dog bone. I'm not really sure what the message to me was there, but okay. It's because I'm working like a dog up here. That's what, okay, all right. So there was something good out of that. All right. Now I forgot what I was showing you. I got carried away with my dog bone. What did I say to you? What am I looking at here? Oh, the additional covenant. Are y'all paying attention at all? What? Why give them an additional covenant? Because look, here's the law. And under the law, they covenanted not to be dealt with on the basis of God's grace, but to be dealt with on the basis of what? Their works. Which means everything is, you know what? If you do good, okay, or if you do bad. But here's what this additional covenant does. It stands alongside the law contract so that even if they don't do this, the law, this covenant reaffirms the fact that they own the land. That doesn't change. That's a sentence to give you a gist of what's in that additional covenant. Now, The last one is 31 verse 1 to chapter 34 verse 12. And this contains the Song of Moses. And what he's going to do here is, and by the way, these are Moses' final acts, because he's not going into the promised land. He's going to die. Joshua's going to take over, and they're going to cross over Jordan. He makes one final appeal to them about remembering the lessons of God's Jehovah-ness and grace. So that is the second stage. Folks, you get the idea, don't you? And look, we haven't even looked at the details of stage 1. I just mentioned stage 1. We just looked at a broad overview about stage 2. But can you see all of the pertinent details that's involved in this? I mean, it really is. There's structure to this. And I'm giving it to you this way so that you can see the structure and the order of things. This is not a hodgepodge of Bible stories like, well, the waters parted and they went across the Red Sea on dry ground and they drowned the Egyptians, and then, God gave them manna, and then, He gave them the law, and then they parted the Jordan and they went across Jordan. And it's not just about... There's real order to the thing that God is doing here. Okay, I don't want to spend any more time on that, but here's what I want to show you. Now remember, in Exodus you had these 4 major parts, and then you had the second part. This had subparts, and you had these third and fourth major part, all that kind of business. What I want to show you is that sitting in this second stage all together, I gave you all 4 major parts. There's 5 major issues that we need to understand. And here they are. The first major issue is God's Jehovah-ness and grace. And I've already told you that from the time they crossed the Red Sea to the time they got at Mount Sinai, they endured 5 trials in order for God to show them that they couldn't do anything on the basis of their works. They were going to have to trust in Him and let Him do for them that which they could not do for themselves. Secondly, the blessings and the curses, Leviticus 26. And that's a very important issue. Third, nothing will thwart God's plan and purpose with Israel. Not the opposition of the Gentiles, and not even the stiff-necked, rebellious people of Israel. There's something in that for you, by the way. I don't mean anything in Israel's program pertains to you. But there's something that we can rejoice in because of a principle that's laid down back there. I'll show it to you. And then the additional covenant concerning the possession of the land. That's a very important issue. And the 5th major issue is the Song of Moses. The Song of Moses takes Israel all the way through, not only their failures, but the way it's going to be for them. And He makes them learn that song and sing it. What a humbling thing. Now you might wonder about why God would do that, but that would be almost the equivalent of teaching your kids a song that went, when I got up, I was really bad. My mama gave me a spank, and tomorrow I'm going to be bad too. I'm going to get another spank. And I mean, it's almost like I'm singing a song about, oh, Billy loves that. Yeah, we sing that song at night. I knew I should have chose a different tune, but I couldn't put it to Moon River. I don't know how to do that. Okay, so my point here is, this is them singing a song about their own failures and that how they're going to fail. Because God wants them to get the idea, if you just try to do this on your own, this is going to be the result. And every time something happens, they're supposed to kind of remember, I don't want to call it a little ditty, Deuteronomy 32 is actually more than a little ditty, but the Song of Moses is supposed to remind them, we've got to depend on God. It's the only way this is going to happen. All right, so that takes us to the last stage that I want to talk to you about. I'm going to do it real quick, and that's Joshua. Joshua, and that is the conquest stage. Because once they do enter into the land, and so let me just show you this. Joshua begins stage 3 of God's program with Israel. That is the conquest stage. And in the first 9 verses of chapter 1, The entire book of Joshua is given to you in a nutshell. So I'm just going to kind of lay this out for you. Number one, in those first 9 verses, it talks about the details regarding Israel's physical entrance into the land. And we call it the promised land because He promised it to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their seed. Remember, there was that additional covenant given after the law to show that even the law was not going to vacate that promise. The second thing that you see in those first 9 verses, by the way, and this is the way the book is laid out, the details regarding the conquest of the land along with the removal of the Gentiles who were living in it. The third issue is the details regarding the inheritance of the land according to the tribes of Israel. In other words, each one of those tribes had a land grant. The land was divided up. That was going to be their inheritance, not just where they were going to dwell. That was going to be their inheritance forever. And so those 3 issues are kind of laying out the book of Joshua for you. Now, where am I here? Oh, good, perfect. According to the timer, I have 49 seconds left. So let's do the third one, can we? We'll just let Mark stop it and crank it right back up, because this now will get us returned back to where we were, because what I needed you to see, because we're going to be calling some of this up now. So now all I have to do is refer to it, and you'll be able to remember it. Okay, so hey, we'll stop right here. We'll take just a minute.